World of Warcraft has some of the most terrifying villains in gaming history, and none of them are more ancient, more powerful, or more disturbing than the old gods. These eldritch horrors have been pulling strings behind nearly every major catastrophe on Azeroth for thousands of years. Today, I'm breaking down every single old god and everything we know about them, starting with the one that fooled millions of players into thinking they'd actually won, C'Thun. C'Thun is the old god of madness and chaos. It created the Karaji, an entire insectoid race built to serve as its army, and it's been sitting beneath the sands of Ahn'Qiraj in Silithus since before recorded history. But here's why C'Thun matters more than most people realize. It was the first old god that players ever directly fought in World of Warcraft, the very first one, and almost nobody understood what they were actually dealing with. On January 3rd, 2006, patch 1.9 dropped, and with it came the Gates of Ahn'Qiraj event. Entire servers had to work together for weeks, gathering war supplies, and completing a massive quest chain just to ring a gong and open the gates. It was one of the most ambitious community events WoW had ever attempted, and at the end of it all, deep inside the Temple of Ahn'Qiraj, 40 players would come face to face with C'Thun itself, a giant eyeball surrounded by tentacles, whispering madness into your skull while trying to literally digest your raid group inside its stomach. Players killed it, got the loot, celebrated, moved on. But here's the thing, they didn't actually kill C'Thun. What players defeated was C'Thun's physical manifestation, basically the tip of the iceberg poking through the surface. After the fight, the red dragon Kalistras recovered C'Thun's eye from the wreckage, and the fact that it still existed confirmed something deeply uncomfortable. C'Thun wasn't dead. It was pushed back into imprisonment, weakened, but very much alive. And the proof came later. During the events surrounding the Lich King's invasion of Northrend, the Twilight's Hammer cult leader Cho'Gall attempted a full resurrection of C'Thun, not a summoning, not a ritual to channel its power, a complete resurrection of the old god itself. The only reason it didn't work was because Med-An, wielding the combined power of the new Council of Tirisfal, stopped him at the last possible moment. Think about what that means. Years after 40 of Azeroth's greatest heroes defeated C'Thun, one cultist nearly brought it all the way back. The raid, the event, the server-wide effort, all of it barely mattered on a cosmic scale. And that's the question C'Thun left hanging over the entire franchise. Can mortal adventurers actually kill an old god? Or are we just hitting the snooze button on something that will always wake back up? The community has been debating this for nearly 2 decades, and nobody has a definitive answer. C'Thun's current status is listed as defeated, not dead, not destroyed, defeated. But if C'Thun's ambiguous survival unsettles you, wait until you hear about the old god that didn't need to fight anyone at all. It just whispered, and entire civilizations tore themselves apart. Yogg-Saron. They call Yogg-Saron the god of death. But here's the thing, Yogg-Saron never killed anyone, not directly, not once in thousands of years of recorded history. It didn't need to, because Yogg-Saron is the most patient villain in the entire Warcraft universe, and its weapon of choice was never claws or tentacles or eldritch magic. It was a whisper. Yogg-Saron was imprisoned deep beneath Northrend in the Titan facility of Ulduar. The Titan Forge Keepers were assigned as its wardens. Powerful beings like Loken, Thorim, Hodir, Tyr, Mimiron, Freya, Odin, Ra, and Arcadus. 9 of the most powerful beings the Titans ever created, all part of a system designed to keep a single prisoner locked away. That should tell you exactly how dangerous this thing was considered. But Yogg-Saron didn't try to break out by force. It just started talking. Over millennia, Yogg-Saron whispered into the mind of Keeper Loken, slowly, carefully, planting doubts, stoking fears, twisting thoughts until Loken couldn't tell the old god's voice from his own anymore. And eventually, Loken broke. He orchestrated the murder of his fellow keeper Tyr and betrayed every single one of his brothers and sisters. The prison guards became the prisoners, and Yogg-Saron committed 0 acts of violence to make it happen. It just waited and whispered until someone else did the dirty work. But here's where it gets worse. While corrupting Loken, Yogg-Saron also corrupted the Forge of Wills, one of the Titan's most important tools. Through this corruption, it unleashed the Curse of Flesh, a catastrophic transformation that turned Titan-forged constructs, beings made of stone, metal, and crystal, into soft, mortal, flesh and blood creatures. Dwarves, gnomes, humans, every mortal race that traces its origins to the Titan-forged exist because Yogg-Saron wanted them to be weaker, more corruptible, more afraid. The entire history of mortal life on Azeroth was reshaped by a single act of sabotage from inside a prison cell. Players finally confronted Yogg-Saron in patch 3.1, Secrets of Ulduar, on April 14, 2009, and the encounter itself was a masterclass in showing exactly how deep this thing's influence went. During the fight, Yogg-Saron projected 3 visions directly into the minds of the raid group. The first was the assassination of King Lane Rin. The second was the creation of the Dragon Soul. The third was Bolvar for Dragon being tortured at the Wrathgate. 3 pivotal moments in Azeroth's history. 3 events that changed the course of entire civilizations. And Yogg-Saron was there for all of them, lurking in the background, pulling strings nobody even knew existed. Its physical corruption was just as insidious. Yogg-Saron's hardened blood, a substance called Saronite, had spread across Northrend like a disease. It was in the ground, in the mines, in the armor the Scourge wore. Players walked on it, fought on it, and crafted gear from it without fully understanding what it was. A literal piece of an old god, woven into the landscape of an entire continent. And that's the real horror of Yogg-Saron. The title God of Death sounds like it should belong to something that raises armies of undead or devours souls. But Yogg-Saron was never shown practicing necromancy. It didn't resurrect anything. It didn't need to. Its power was manipulation, pure and simple. It turned allies against each other, rewrote the biological destiny of entire species, and fingerprinted some of the most devastating events in Warcraft history, all without ever leaving its cage. Most villains want to escape their prison. Yogg-Saron turned the entire world into one. But if you think a puppet master pulling strings from a cage is disturbing, wait until you hear about the old god that was so dangerous the Titans killed it with their bare hands. And the fallout from that decision is still destroying Azeroth to this day. Y'Sharj. Every other old god on this list got imprisoned. Y'Sharj got killed. And that single decision changed everything about how the Titans handled Azeroth from that point forward. Y'Sharj was the most powerful and wicked of all the old gods. Not by a small margin either. This thing was called the God of Seven Heads and Rage Unbound, and it earned both names. While the other old gods were content to whisper and corrupt from the shadows, Y'Sharj dominated. Its influence was so overwhelming, its grip on the planet so deep, that the Titans looked at the situation and decided half measures weren't going to cut it. So Aman'Thul, the High Father of the Pantheon, the leader of the Titans themselves, reached down and ripped Y'Sharj directly off the surface of Azeroth. And it worked. Y'Sharj died. The most powerful old god was gone. But here's where it gets catastrophic. Tearing Y'Sharj from the planet left a wound so massive, so devastating, that it nearly killed Azeroth itself. The world soul inside the planet started bleeding arcane energy from the gash, and the Titans realized something terrifying. The old gods had burrowed so deep into Azeroth that they were essentially fused with the planet. Killing them meant killing the world. That wound would eventually become the Well of Eternity, one of the most important locations in all of Warcraft lore. But at the time, it was nothing more than proof that the Titans had made a horrible mistake. This is the moment, right here. This is why S'thun is imprisoned instead of dead. This is why Yogg-Saron sits in a cage beneath Ulduar instead of being destroyed. Every single decision the Titans made about containing the remaining old gods traces directly back to Y'Sharj's death. They couldn't risk it again. One more extraction like that, and Azeroth was done. But Y'Sharj wasn't finished, not even close. Its dying breath spawned 7 entities called the Prime Sha, physical embodiments of negative emotions given monstrous form: anger, hatred, violence, fear, doubt, despair, and pride. 7 heads, 7 Sha, each one a living curse that plagued the continent of Pandaria for thousands of years after Y'Sharj's body was gone. The god died, but its corruption kept feeding on every negative thought, every moment of weakness from every living thing on that continent. The Pandaren built their entire culture around emotional discipline, specifically because losing control meant feeding the Sha. That's how deep Y'Sharj's influence ran. An old god that had been dead for millennia was still shaping civilizations. And then there's the heart. The Titan-forged Keeper Ra sealed Y'Sharj's heart in a vault beneath the Veil of Eternal Blossoms, locked away where nobody could reach it. It stayed there for ages, until Garrosh Hellscream found it during Mists of Pandaria, and used the sacred pools of Pandaria to fully restore the heart of Y'Sharj. Not the full god, the heart was never powerful enough to resurrect Y'Sharj entirely, but it gave Garrosh enough old god power to become the final raid boss of the expansion, a mortal war chief, juiced up on the literal heart of a dead god. That's the kind of legacy Y'Sharj left behind. The Mantid race worshipped Y'Sharj fervently for millennia, calling it the Great Old One, and building their entire civilization around devotion to the 7 heads. Even after Y'Sharj was long dead, the Mantid kept the faith. They're living proof that you don't need to be alive to have followers. Now here's where things get really interesting. There's a community theory that refuses to die, and honestly, the evidence is uncomfortable. Some players believe that Elune, the moon goddess, one of the most sacred and benevolent figures in all of Warcraft, is actually Y'Sharj's consciousness transformed into a cosmic force of light. The argument centers on the Well of Eternity. Y'Sharj's death created it. Elune's power is deeply connected to it. The theory suggests that when Y'Sharj was ripped from Azeroth, its essence didn't just dissipate, it changed. evolved into something unrecognizable. If that theory ever turns out to be true, it would fundamentally rewrite one of WoW's most beloved characters as the reborn consciousness of its most evil old god. Let that sit for a second. But if Y'Sharj is the old god whose death changed everything, the next one is the old god whose patience might outlast everyone. Because N'Zoth didn't need to be the strongest, it just needed to wait. N'Zoth. Here's the thing about N'Zoth. Every old god we've talked about so far had a moment. C'Thun had its temple. Yogg-Saron had its prison break. Y'Sharj had its heart ripped out by a literal titan. They all showed up, made a mess, and got dealt with. N'Zoth didn't need to show up. It just sat in the dark, and won anyway. For over a decade of real-world time, N'Zoth was the old god nobody had ever seen. Not a glimpse, not a tentacle, nothing. And yet its fingerprints were on everything. You know Deathwing? The world-ending dragon that shattered an entire continent and nearly destroyed Azeroth during Cataclysm? N'Zoth made him. Neltharion, the Earth Warder, one of the 5 dragon aspects chosen by the Titans themselves, was slowly corrupted by N'Zoth's whispers until he became the single most destructive force the world had ever seen. That alone would make N'Zoth the most dangerous old god in the game. But it didn't stop there. Queen Azshara, the most powerful mortal mage in Azeroth's history, made a desperate bargain with N'Zoth as the Well of Eternity collapsed around her and her highborn followers. N'Zoth answered. It transformed them into the Naga, an entire civilization reshaped into serpentine horrors that would lurk beneath the oceans for 10,000 years. And while all of that was happening, N'Zoth was also quietly building the Emerald Nightmare, a corrupted shadow dimension that plagued druids and terrorized the Dream for ages. 3 separate world-shaking catastrophes. 0 direct appearances. That's not just influence, that's efficiency. N'Zoth was finally freed from the last prison during Battle for Azeroth's patch 8.3, Visions of N'Zoth, which went live on January 14, 2020. After years of build-up, players got to enter Neolotha, the Waking City, a 12-boss raid that served as N'Zoth's domain. The final encounter was against N'Zoth itself, and it pulled a move straight out of Yogg-Saron's playbook. During the fight, N'Zoth projected 3 corruption scenarios directly into players' minds: Deathwing's shattering of the world, Queen Azshara's original bargain, and the treachery between Azshara and Sylvanas. If that sounds familiar, it should. Yogg-Saron did the exact same thing with its 3 visions in Ulduar. It was a deliberate thematic echo, connecting the 2 old gods as manipulators who weaponize history itself. Players ultimately defeated N'Zoth using the Forge of Origination, a titan device powered by the Heart of Azeroth. Massive beam of energy, old god obliterated. Credits roll. And then Magni Bronzebeard, the speaker for Azeroth's World Soul, said something that made every lore fan on the planet lose their minds. He declared that Azeroth was now free of old gods. Free of old gods. After everything this video has covered, you already know why that's a problem. C'Thun wasn't killed, just suppressed. Yogg-Saron wasn't destroyed, just recontained. Y'Sharj was ripped apart by a titan and still spawned 7 Sha that terrorized a continent for millennia. The entire history of old gods on Azeroth is a history of things that refuse to stay dead, and now we're supposed to believe that one big laser solved the problem permanently? The community didn't buy it for a second. Forums exploded. Threads stacked up arguing that N'Zoth's defeat was either a deception, a temporary setback, or the biggest narrative fumble in WoW's history. Some players pointed out that N'Zoth, the master of corruption and illusion, might have simply shown everyone what they wanted to see. Others were just frustrated that the most patient, most successful old god in the franchise got wrapped up in a single patch cycle after a decade of buildup. Whether N'Zoth is truly gone or just waiting, one thing is certain: no old god in Warcraft's history accomplished more while doing less. But if you think the old god story ends with Magni's optimistic little declaration, there's one more entity we need to talk about, and it might be the most unsettling of them all. Xal'atath. For years, nobody thought twice about the dagger. Shadow priests in Legion received an artifact weapon called Xal'atath, Blade of the Black Empire, and it whispered to you constantly. It commented on raids, dungeons, old lore, other players. Claudia Christian voiced it, and the performance was so unsettling that players started treating the blade less like a weapon and more like a passenger. Something ancient riding along in your inventory, watching everything you did, and remembering things it shouldn't know. Most people assumed it was a trapped old god fragment, a piece of the Black Empire sealed in metal. Cool flavor text, creepy voice lines, nothing more. They were wrong. In Battle for Azeroth, Xal'atath broke free. She drew power from an artifact called the Void Stone, killed a high elf named Inanus, and possessed her body. Just like that, the dagger had legs. But here's where it gets interesting. Xal'atath didn't go on a rampage. She didn't try to summon the void or destroy Azeroth. She went straight to N'Zoth and made a deal. She would deliver powerful relics and an adventurer directly to the old god, and in exchange, N'Zoth would grant her freedom. Let that sink in. She used an old god as a tool, N'Zoth, the Corruptor, the entity that bent a dragon aspect to his will and transformed an entire civilization into Naga. Got played by something that had been sitting in a priest's weapon slot for an entire expansion. She gave him exactly what he wanted, collected her payment, and walked away while N'Zoth thought he'd won. But the real twist didn't come until the war within. Illyria Windrunner, someone deeply attuned to void energy, flat out stated that she doesn't believe Xal'atath is an old god at all. She described her as a survivor from the depths of time, and that phrase changes everything. Because if Xal'atath isn't an old god, then what is she? The leading community theory points to Kesh, a destroyed world mentioned in recent lore. The idea is that Kesh had its own world soul, like Azeroth does, and when that planet was destroyed, the world soul survived. Xal'atath may be what's left of that soul, a being on the same cosmic tier as a titan, not a servant of the void, but something that predates the old gods entirely. Think about what that means for her timeline. If this theory holds, she watched her world die. She was somehow imprisoned inside a dagger for millennia during the Black Empire era. She sat in silence through the War of the Ancients, the Sundering, the rise and fall of every civilization on Azeroth. She whispered to shadow priests in Legion like a curiosity, and then she manipulated an old god into setting her free. That's not the behavior of a minion. That's patience on a scale that makes even N'Zoth look impulsive. Now, I need to be clear here. None of this is fully confirmed. Blizzard is actively revealing Xal'atath's true nature throughout the War Within, and a lot of what the community believes is built on scattered quest dialogue, environmental clues, and theory crafting. The Kesh connection is compelling but not officially stated as canon. Her exact origins, her real power level, her endgame, all of it is still being written in real time. And honestly, that's what makes her terrifying. Every other old god on this list has a complete story. C'Thun was defeated, Yogg-Saron was contained, Y'Sharj was killed so violently it scarred the planet. N'Zoth was obliterated by the Forge of Origination. Their chapters are closed, or at least paused. Xal'atath's chapter is wide open. She's the primary antagonist of the current expansion, and nobody knows what she actually wants. Players are debating whether she's what the old gods themselves feared, whether she's building towards something the Void Lords sent her to do, or whether she's operating entirely on her own agenda. What we do know is this: she spent thousands of years in a prison nobody recognized as a prison. She let players carry her around like loot. She whispered secrets that turned out to be more accurate than anyone realized. And when she finally made her move, she didn't fight her way out. She negotiated. She's not the strongest entity on this list. She might be the smartest, and her story isn't over. Whatever Xal'atath truly is, Blizzard hasn't finished telling us, and that makes her the most dangerous name in all of Warcraft lore right now. Not because of what she's done, but because of what she hasn't done yet. If you enjoyed this video and want to see everything you need to know about orcs in WoW, click the video on the screen now.